The word my mother used was vindictive. She spat it across my kitchen counter like a curse, all because I finally called the police on my own sister. For 32 years, I had been the responsible one, the quiet fixer who kept her head down and her credit score perfect. But the moment I stopped lighting myself on fire to keep Ruby warm, I learned that in my family, survival is the ultimate betrayal. The silence in my townhouse was expensive, but I had paid for every second of it. That was the thought that anchored me every morning at 6 o'clock when the alarm on my phone buzzed, pulling me out of a dreamless sleep and into the gray dawn of Brook Hollow. My home was not large. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a row of identical structures on the edge of town, where the siding was a sensible beige and the homeowners association fees were just low enough to be manageable. But it was mine. The deed had my name on it, Stella Stewart, and no one else's. I had bought it 3 years ago, scraping together the down payment by skipping vacations, bringing brown bag lunches to work every single day, and driving a sedan that was old enough to vote. As I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, waiting for the coffee to brew, I ran my hand over the laminate countertop. It was cool and clean. There were no dirty dishes left in the sink from the night before, no unpaid bills scattered on the table, and no drama waiting for me behind a closed door. This was the life I had built. It was small, contained, and terrified of chaos. My job at Horizon Line Logistics was much the same. I worked as a project coordinator, a title that sounded important but mostly meant I was the person who made sure everyone else did what they were supposed to do. I spent 8 hours a day staring at spreadsheets, tracking shipping containers moving across oceans, and mediating arguments between warehouse managers and trucking companies. It was not glamorous work. It was a grind of details and deadlines, requiring a level of hypervigilance that exhausted me by 5 in the afternoon. The commute from my townhouse to the industrial park took 45 minutes each way. I spent that time listening to audiobooks or simply driving in silence, mentally calculating my budget for the month. I knew exactly how much was in my checking account down to the cent. I knew that on Friday, the electric bill would auto-draft $72.14. I knew I had $300 set aside for groceries and gas for the next 2 weeks. People often told me I was boring. My mother, Elaine, usually phrased it differently. She called me steady, but the way she said the word, with a slight dip in her voice, made it sound less like a compliment and more like a consolation prize. "Stella is steady," she would say to her friends. "You never have to worry about Stella." She was right. They never did. Sunday arrived with the heavy, humid air typical of late summer in our part of the state. Sunday dinner was a non-negotiable event in the Stewart family calendar. If I missed one, my father, Martin, would call me on Monday morning with a voice full of wounded confusion, asking if I was angry with them. So, I went. I always went. I pulled my car into the driveway of my parents' house at exactly 5 o'clock. Their house was a ranch-style build from the 70s. Meticulously maintained by my father, the lawn was cut in perfect diagonal stripes. The hedges were trimmed into rigid boxes. It was the house of people who did everything right, at least on the outside. When I walked through the front door, the smell of pot roast and roasted carrots hit me, a scent that was inextricably linked to my childhood. It smelled like safety, but beneath it, there was the faint, acrid scent of old cigarette smoke that never quite left the curtains, a reminder of my mother's habit she claimed to have quit 10 years ago. "Hey, Mom," I called out. Stepping into the kitchen, Elaine was at the stove, stirring gravy. She was a small woman with nervous hands and hair that was dyed a shade of blonde too bright for her age. She turned and gave me a tight smile. "You are here," she said. "Good. Put the salad on the table. Your sister is running a little late." "Of course she is." I thought, but I said nothing. I just picked up the wooden salad bowl and carried it to the dining room. My father was sitting in his recliner in the living room, watching a golf tournament with the volume turned up too high. "Hi, Dad," I said. He looked over, his eyes glassy from a nap. "Hey, Stell," he said. "How is work?" "Fine," I said. "Busy. We have a big contract coming in from the coast." That is nice, he said, turning his attention back to the screen. Good benefits at that place. You stick with it. That was the extent of the inquiry into my life. I walked back to the kitchen to help my mother. We worked in a rhythm that had been established when I was a teenager. I set the table. She plated the food. I poured the ice water. She sliced the meat. Is she bringing anyone? I asked, placing 4 napkins on the table. Elaine sighed, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 excuses. No, she and that boy, the one with the motorcycle, they broke up. She is having a hard time. Stella, be nice to her. I am always nice to her, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I know, Elaine said, wiping her hands on a dish towel, but she has just had a run of bad luck lately. Her car needed a new transmission, and her landlord is being difficult about the rent. It is just one thing after another for that poor girl. I stiffened. I knew what bad luck meant in Ruby's dictionary. It meant she had spent her rent money on concert tickets or a weekend trip to the beach and was now scrambling to find a villain to blame for the consequences. The front door banged open 20 minutes later. Ruby blew into the house like a weather event, her arms full of bags and her energy vibrating at a frequency that made the air feel thin. She was 29, 3 years younger than me, but she still moved through the world with the chaotic entitlement of a teenager. Sorry, I am so sorry, she announced. Dropping her purse on the sofa and rushing into the kitchen, the traffic on the boulevard was a nightmare. And then I had to stop for gas. And the pump was broken. She hugged Mom, then gave me a quick, distracted squeeze. She smelled like expensive perfume and vanilla vape smoke. You look tired. Stella, she said, pulling back and looking at my face. You are working too hard. I am fine, I said. Just a long week. We sat down to eat. The dynamic shifted immediately, as it always did. The room seemed to tilt toward Ruby. My parents leaned in, their faces softening, their attention fixated on her like plants turning toward the sun. So, tell us. Ruby, Martin said, buttering a roll. How are things? Ruby let out a dramatic groan, stabbing a carrot with her fork. Honestly, a mess. My credit card company is charging me these insane late fees. I tried to call them, but they were so rude. I swear. The system is rigged against regular people. I focused on my pot roast. Regular people paid their bills on time. Regular people did not view credit limits as suggestions. Did you get it sorted out? Elaine asked, her voice laced with anxiety. Not really, Ruby said. Chewing? I just maxed out the other one to pay the minimum on the first one. It is whatever. I will figure it out when my tax return comes. That is months away. I said. Ruby rolled her eyes. Thanks, Stella. I know how calendars work. I am just saying, it is temporary. I have some leads on a bartending gig downtown. The tips are supposed to be amazing. I thought you were going to look for something with insurance. Martin said gently. I am, Ruby said. Defensive now. But I need cash now. Dad, unless you want me to move back in here. No, Elaine said quickly. You need your independence. We are just worried. The conversation looped around Ruby's crises for the next hour. Her car was making a noise. Her apartment had a draft. Her ex-boyfriend was a narcissist. My parents offered solutions, sympathy, and, I suspected, money. I watched the dance, feeling the familiar coldness settle in my chest. I was the spectator. I was the audience for the main event. Toward the end of the meal, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was an email notification from a credit monitoring app I had signed up for years ago and rarely checked. The subject line read, Urgent Alert, New Account Inquiry. I frowned. I hadn't applied for anything. I was about to open the email when Ruby reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. No phones at the table, she chirped. Mom, tell her. Elaine smiled indulgently. She is right. Stella, put it away. It is family time. I swiped the notification away and slid the phone back into my pocket. It was probably a glitch, or maybe just a marketing email disguised as an alert. I was too drained to think about it. I just wanted to finish my potatoes and go home to my quiet, Empty townhouse. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee. I was sitting on the love seat, scrolling through my work emails, when I heard the jingle of keys. I looked up to see Ruby standing by the front door, holding my car keys. "I'm just going to run to the store for a pack of smokes," she said. "My car is blocked in by Dad's truck." I stood up. "Ruby, ask me first. And no. I don't want you smoking in my car. Oh my God. I will roll the window down," she said, dangling the keys. "Don't be such a control freak. I will be back in 10 minutes. I walked toward her. "Give me the keys. Ruby, I need to leave soon anyway." Elaine stepped between us, placing a hand on my arm. "Stella, let her go. It is just a quick trip. She is stressed out. Do not make a scene." I looked at my mother. Her eyes were pleading, but hard. It was the look she always gave me when I tried to draw a boundary. It said, "Be the bigger person. Absorb this so we don't have to deal with her explosion." She does this every time. "Mom," I said, my voice low. "She takes things without asking." "It is just a car," Elaine whispered. "She is your sister. Please." I looked at Ruby, who was smirking by the door. She knew she had won. She always won. "Fine," I said, stepping back. 10 minutes. Ruby gave a little salute and slipped out the door. I went back to the kitchen to help Elaine load the dishwasher. The anger was simmering under my skin, hot and tight. I aggressively rinsed a plate, the water splashing onto my blouse. "You are too hard on her," Elaine said quietly, not looking at me. "I am not hard on her. I just expect her to act like an adult. She is 29. Mom, she is sensitive." Elaine said, "She feels things deeply. Not everyone is as tough as you are. Stella, you have always been self-sufficient." She said it like it was a biological trait, like eye color, rather than a survival mechanism I had been forced to develop because they were too busy putting out Ruby's fires to notice I was burning too. I rinsed another plate. I heard Dad talking about paying off her car loan. I said, "Did you do that?" Elaine scrubbed a pot with sudden intensity. "It was an old loan. The interest was eating her alive. We just wanted to give her a clean slate. You gave her a clean slate last year." I said, "And the year before that? You wired her rent money 3 months ago." "It is our money." "Stella," Elaine snapped, "we can do what we want with it." "I know," I said, "but you keep saving her, so she never learns how to swim. And you never needed saving." Elaine said, turning to face me, "You should be proud of that. Why are you so jealous of the help we give her?" "We helped you, didn't we?" I froze. "You helped me with the down payment." I said, $5,000. I paid you back within a year. Every cent. "Yes. But we gave it to you when you needed it," Elaine said, her voice dropping to a manipulative purr. "We were there for you. That is what family does. And now, we need you to step up a little." I put the plate down. "What do you mean?" Elaine dried her hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "Ruby needs a steady job. Something with a routine." I was thinking, surely Horizon Line is hiring. You are a coordinator there. You have pull. I stared at her. "Mom, no." "Why not?" Elaine asked, her eyes wide and innocent. "Because the last time I got her a job, at the bookstore, she stopped showing up after 3 weeks because the manager had a weird vibe. I am not putting my reputation on the line for her." "Stella," Elaine said, her voice hardening, "you owe us. We helped you get that house. We helped you get started. I paid you back." I repeated, "It is not about the money," Elaine hissed. "It is about loyalty. Your sister is drowning, and you are sitting on the shore refusing to throw a rope because you are worried about your reputation." The guilt hit me in the stomach, precise and familiar. My parents had mastered the art of making my stability feel like selfishness. "I will send her the link to the application portal." I said, defeated, "But I cannot promise anything." Elaine smiled and patted my cheek. "That is all I ask." "See? Was that so hard?" Ruby returned 20 minutes later, smelling of smoke that she had definitely not rolled the window down enough to hide. I took my keys without a word, said goodbye to my father, and drove home. The drive was blurry. I felt hollowed out. I parked in my driveway and sat in the dark car for a long time. Looking at the townhouse, it was mine. But tonight, it felt heavy. The strings attached to it, the invisible debts my parents tallied, felt like they were tightening around my throat. The rest of the week was a blur of spreadsheets and rain. I kept my head down at work. Avoiding the break room and the social chatter, I was in survival mode, conserving energy. On Thursday evening, I stopped at the grocery store on my way home. I needed the basics: milk, eggs, bread, some chicken for the weekend. The store was crowded, the aisles clogged with people rushing to get home. I navigated the cart with practiced efficiency, my mind already on the laundry I needed to do that night. I reached the checkout counter and unloaded my items. The cashier was a young girl with bright purple fingernails, chewing gum with a rhythmic snap. She scanned the items, the beep of the machine the only sound between us. "That will be $112.40, she said. I pulled out my debit card, the blue one from Brightway Credit Union, and slid it into the chip reader. I waited for the familiar prompt to enter my PIN. Instead, the machine let out a harsh, flat tone. "Declined." The cashier said, not looking up. I frowned. "That is weird. Try it again. The chip is a little worn." She sighed and inserted the card again. "Beep. Declined," she said, louder this time. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding thin. "I just got paid on Friday. There is money in there." "Maybe you spent it?" the cashier suggested unhelpfully. "I did not spend it," I snapped. "I know exactly how much is in there." The line behind me was growing. A man in a suit checked his watch and let out a loud, theatrical sigh. A woman with a crying baby shifted her weight, the cart wheels squeaking. "Do you have another card?" the cashier asked. I fumbled in my wallet. I had a backup credit card, one I kept for emergencies, but I rarely used it. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly. "Try this one." She took it. Beep. Declined. The silence that followed was deafening. The man in the suit leaned forward. "Come on, lady. Some of us have places to be." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. This was impossible. I was Stella Stewart. I had an Excel spreadsheet for my coffee budget. I did not get declined. "I will have to put it back," I whispered. The cashier rolled her eyes and started shoving my groceries to the side. Next, she yelled. I walked out of the store with nothing, my face burning. I felt like a criminal. I felt like Ruby. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Panic was starting to bloom in my chest, a cold, expanding flower. Was it identity theft? Had someone hacked the bank? I ran into my townhouse and threw my purse on the table. I didn't even take off my coat. I opened my laptop and logged into the Brightway Credit Union portal. My password worked. The page loaded. I stared at the screen, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My checking account balance was $4.12. I scrolled down, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. There was a list of transactions I had never made, hundreds of dollars at a liquor store in a part of town I never visited, online purchases for electronics, a withdrawal from an ATM 3 towns over. But it was the loans tab that made my knees give out. I clicked on it. There were 3 new personal loans listed, one for $5,000, one for $10,000, one for $2,000, all approved in the last 4 months. I clicked on the credit card tab. 2 new credit cards. Both maxed out. I sat down hard on the kitchen chair. The numbers swam before my eyes. The total debt was staggering. It was more than I made in a year. How I whispered to the empty room. How is this possible? I thought about the email I had swiped away on Sunday. The urgent alert. I grabbed my file box from the bottom shelf of the bookcase. It was where I threw the mail I didn't have time to open immediately, mostly junk offers, flyers, and what I thought were pre-approved credit card solicitations. I dumped the box onto the table. Envelopes slid across the wood. I started tearing them open. A letter from a bank I didn't bank with, thanking me for my application. A letter from a collection agency, referencing a debt I didn't recognize. A notice of an address change confirmation. I picked up that one. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read the text. Dear Stella Stewart, this letter is to confirm that your billing address has been updated to 402 Elm Terrace, apartment 4B. I stopped breathing. Elm Terrace. That was the new apartment complex on the east side of town, the one Ruby had just moved into. I read it again and again. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. The bad luck, the leads on jobs, the new furniture she hadn't mentioned at dinner, but I had assumed was secondhand. The way she had joked about maxed-out cards. She hadn't been joking about her cards. She had been joking about mine. I looked at the dates on the letters. This had been going on for months. While I was brown-bagging my lunch to save $3, while I was driving a car that rattled, while I was listening to my mother lecture me about being steady and helping my fragile sister. Ruby had been systematically dismantling my life. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to put my head between my knees. It wasn't just money, it was my name, my credit, the one thing I had that proved I was responsible, that proved I was not like them. She had taken it. She had worn my identity like a costume, used it up, and trashed it. And the worst part, the part that made the bile rise in my throat, was the realization of how easy it had been. She knew my mother's maiden name. She knew my first pet. She knew my social security number because it was probably written on some old form in my parents' filing cabinet, the one she had access to whenever she wanted. I sat up and looked around my kitchen, the clean counters, the quiet. It suddenly felt fragile, like a stage set that could be knocked over with a single push. I looked at the pile of opened letters. They were not junk. They were warnings. They were screams I had been too tired to hear. My phone sat on the table, silent and black. I thought about calling my parents. I imagined my mother's voice. Don't make a scene. Stella, we can fix this. She didn't mean it. I realized then that if I called them, they would ask me to bury it. They would ask me to pay for my own destruction to save Ruby from the consequences of causing it. I looked at the credit report on my screen. My score, which had been a pristine 780, was now 520. I was ruined. I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut was loud in the empty house. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling over me, displacing the panic. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. The streetlights hummed. A dog barked in the distance. I knew what I had to do. I also knew that doing it would cost me the only family I had. But looking at the wreckage on my kitchen table, I realized I didn't have a family. I had a liability. And for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't going to be the one to pay the bill. I walked back to the table, picked up the letter with the Elm Terrace address, and placed it carefully on top of the pile. Then I went to the sink, filled a glass of water, and drank it in one long, steady swallow. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. Tomorrow, I would go to the police. But tonight, I would sit here in the expensive silence of my home and mourn the sister I thought I had, before I had to destroy the one I actually did. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was waiting, and so was I. The next morning, the sun rose with an aggressive brightness that hurt my eyes. I had not slept. I had spent the night building a timeline in a notebook, matching the transaction dates on my online statement to the calendar on my wall. July 12th, a charge for $600 at a boutique clothing store. I checked my calendar. That was the day of my cousin's wedding. I had been a bridesmaid. Ruby had skipped it, claiming a migraine. August 4th. A cash advance of $500. That was the day Ruby had called me, crying, saying she was short on rent and Dad was being mean. I had told her I couldn't help. She had hung up on me. 2 hours later, the withdrawal was made. The patterns were so obvious now that I felt stupid. I felt complicit in my own victimization. How had I not seen it? How had I not felt the weight of it? I called in sick to Horizon Line Logistics. It was the first time in 4 years I had used a sick day. My manager, Dave, sounded surprised. Is everything okay? Stella. You never call out. I have a family emergency. I said. My voice was steady, but it felt foreign in my throat. I hope everyone is all right, he said. No. I thought, no one is all right? I hung up and got dressed. I put on my best blazer, a charcoal gray wool that made me feel armored. I tied my hair back. I applied my makeup with military precision. I needed to look like Stella Stewart, project coordinator. I needed to look like a woman who could not possibly be responsible for $5,000 in unpaid liquor store bills. I drove to the Brightway Credit Union branch on Main Street. I had opened my account there when I was 16, with $50 from babysitting money. The teller, Mrs. Gable, used to give me lollipops. She was long retired now. I sat in the waiting area, clutching my folder of evidence. The chairs were upholstered in a scratchy blue fabric. The air conditioning was humming. Stella. I looked up. A woman in a navy suit was standing by a desk, holding a clipboard. Her name tag read, Sarah, Fraud Specialist. I stood up. My legs felt heavy. I am here. I said, come on back, she said kindly. I followed her to a small office with glass walls. I sat down. I placed the folder on the desk. I think, I said, and then I stopped. I had to clear my throat. I think my identity has been stolen. Sarah nodded, her face serious. Okay, let's take a look. Do you have your account number? I gave it to her. She typed for a moment, her eyes scanning the screen. Then she stopped typing. Her eyebrows pulled together. Oh, she said softly. What I asked. I see a lot of activity here. Stella. A lot. And the address on file was changed 3 months ago. Did you authorize that? No, I said. And these cosigners on the loan applications. Cosigners, I asked. She turned the screen toward me. On the application for the $10,000 personal loan, there was a cosigner listed, Martin Stewart, my father. The room seemed to spin. Dad, I whispered, it looks like his information. Sarah said, his social security number, his signature, although she zoomed in on the signature. It looks a bit shaky. Electronic signatures can be tricky. I stared at the screen. Had he known? Had he helped her, or had she stolen his identity too? The question hung in the air, terrified and ugly. If he had signed it, he had agreed to it. If he had agreed to it, he had agreed to rob me. But if she had stolen his identity too, then he was a victim. I closed my eyes. Stella. Sarah asked, do you know who might have done this? I opened my eyes. I looked at the clean, professional woman across the desk. I looked at the evidence of my ruined life. I knew exactly who had done it. And I knew that once I said the name out loud, the war would begin. I took a breath. Yes. I said, I know who did it. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Who, my sister? I said, Ruby Stewart. The typing started. The sound was sharp, like gunshots in the quiet office. And with every keystroke, I felt the bridge back to my family burning down, plank by plank, until there was nothing left but ash and the cold. Hard ground beneath my feet. The phone felt like a physical weight in my hand. A black brick of plastic and glass that was currently transmitting the sound of my life falling apart. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of Horizon Line Logistics, the engine idling to keep the air conditioning running against the humid morning heat. I had stepped out of the office for what I told my manager was a personal call, a phrase that usually implied a doctor's appointment or a plumber. Not the excavation of a financial grave. I was on hold with Brightway Credit Union. The music was a looping, synthesized saxophone melody that was designed to be soothing, but only made my pulse hammer harder against my jaw. Hello? This is David, a voice cut in, startlingly clear. Thank you for holding. Ms. Stewart, I have pulled up the file you referenced. I took a breath that shuddered in my chest. I stared at the gray dashboard of my sedan, focusing on a patch of dust near the odometer to keep from screaming. Thank you, David, I said, my voice sounding calm, almost detached. That was the trick of my life. If I sounded steady, people assumed I was fine. I need you to walk me through the recent activity, all of it. I need to understand the scope of what is happening. David paused. I could hear the click of a keyboard on his end, of course. I see here that there has been a significant uptick in activity starting in November of last year. Before that, your account history was very traditional, mostly savings deposits, automatic bill pay for utilities, and the mortgage. But starting on November 14th, we show an application for a Platinum Rewards visa. I did not apply for that. I said, it was approved with a limit of $15,000. David continued, his tone neutral, professional. It is currently maxed out. The balance is $15,420. Due to over-limit fees and interest, $15,000. That was half the down payment for my house. That was 3 years of my aggressive savings plan. Go on. I said, there is a personal loan, taken out in January, $10,000. The funds were dispersed to a checking account that was opened simultaneously. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand, and the checking account. Where did the money go? It was withdrawn in cash over a period of 3 weeks, ATM withdrawals, mostly, some point-of-sale purchases at, let me see here, Best Buy, Sephora, and a few liquor stores. I felt a wave of nausea. My sister liked high-end vodka. She liked to buy rounds for the bar when she was feeling magnanimous, playing the role of the rich girl she wasn't. Is that all I asked? No, ma'am. There is also a store credit card for an electronics chain, opened in March, that has a balance of $3,000, and another credit card, a generic MasterCard, opened last month. That one has about $2,000 on it. I closed my eyes. Over $30,000. It was an insurmountable number. It was a number that meant I wasn't just broke. I was underwater. I was drowning in a sea I hadn't even touched. David, I said, and I had to force the name out. I need to know something specific. On the applications, what address was listed? There was a pause. The mailing address for all these accounts is listed as 402 Elm Terrace, Apartment 4B, here in Brook Hollow. The world stopped. I knew that address. I had helped carry a sofa up 3 flights of stairs to that address 2 months ago. I had brought a housewarming gift, a potted succulent, to that address. It was Ruby's apartment. Are you sure? I asked, though I knew the answer. Yes, ma'am. It is listed as the updated primary residence. The employment information lists your current employer, Horizon Line Logistics, which likely helped with the approval odds, but the address is Elm Terrace. Thank you. David, I said, I will need to call you back. I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat in the silence of my car, the air conditioner blasting cold air onto my face, but I felt hot, feverish. Elm Terrace. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a stranger in Russia or a hacker in a basement. It was Ruby, my baby sister, the one I had driven to soccer practice, the one I had tutored in math, the one whose hair I had braided. She had done this. She had sat down, filled out the forms, used my social security number, and directed the plastic cards to her own mailbox. She had walked to her mailbox, picked them up, activated them, and gone shopping. I looked at the clock. It was 11 in the morning. I put the car in gear. I wasn't going back to work. I was going to Elm Terrace. The drive took 20 minutes. I drove with a terrifying precision, obeying every speed limit, stopping completely at every stop sign. My mind was a white static of rage, but my body was on autopilot. Elm Terrace was a new development on the east side of town, the kind of place that advertised luxury living, but was built with thin walls and cheap laminate. I pulled into the visitor lot and stared up at the 4th floor. Ruby's balcony was cluttered with a bicycle she never rode and a dead plant. I got out of the car. I didn't have a plan. I just had the address and the knowledge that my life had been stolen by the person I was supposed to love most in the world. I took the elevator up. The hallway smelled of carpet cleaner and stale cooking oil. I walked to door 4B and knocked. There was no answer. I knocked again. Harder. Ruby. Open the door, I heard shuffling inside. Then the peephole darkened. A moment later, the lock clicked, and the door opened a crack. Ruby stood there, wearing an oversized t-shirt and boxer shorts. Her hair was messy, and she looked like she had just woken up. "Stella," she said, blinking against the hallway light. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at work. Open the door." "Ruby," I said. She hesitated, sensing the vibration of anger coming off me, but she stepped back and opened the door wide. "Okay, weirdo. Come in, but don't judge the mess. I had a late night." I walked into the apartment. It was a disaster, but it was an expensive disaster. Clothes were piled on every surface, but they weren't the thrift store finds she usually bragged about. I saw a designer denim jacket with the tag still on it draped over a chair. I saw boxes of high-end makeup scattered on the coffee table, but it was the electronics that stopped me. Mounted on the wall was a television that was easily 65 inches. It was sleek, thin, and brand new. Below it, on a media console that looked like solid oak, sat the latest gaming system and a high-end soundbar. "Ruby," I said, my voice low. "Where did you get all this?" Ruby walked into the kitchenette and started filling a kettle with water. "Oh, you know," she said breezily. "Sales. I found some crazy deals online. And the TV was a gift from a friend who was moving." "A friend?" I repeated. "Yeah. Why are you being so interrogative? Do you want coffee?" "I have that expensive espresso stuff now." I turned to look at her. She was spooning coffee grounds into a French press. Her movements casual, unbothered. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She didn't look like someone who was struggling to pay rent or fighting with bad luck. She looked like someone who had $15,000 of someone else's money. I walked over to the kitchen counter and placed my hands flat on the cool granite. "I just got off the phone with Brightway Credit Union," I said. Ruby froze. The spoon hovered over the French press. "Oh," she said. Her voice didn't pitch up, but it went tight. "They told me about the credit cards. Ruby. The ones mailed to this address, apartment 4B. Ruby slowly lowered the spoon. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a long moment, adjusting the lid of the coffee canister, before she finally turned to face me. Her expression wasn't one of guilt. It was one of annoyance. It was the face she made when Mom asked her to clear the table. "Okay, look," she said, leaning back against the counter and crossing her arms. "I can explain." "Explain," I asked, my voice rising. "You stole my identity. You opened accounts in my name. I didn't steal your identity." "Stella," she said, rolling her eyes, "I just borrowed your credit. There is a difference." "Borrowed?" I stared at her, unable to comprehend the words coming out of her mouth. "You maxed them out. Ruby, $30,000. You call that borrowing? I was going to pay it back," she insisted, throwing her hands up. "I have a plan. I'm going to get that bartending job. And I was going to make payments. I just needed a bridge. Stella, things got tight, and you know how Dad gets when I ask for money. He gives me the lecture. I just didn't want the lecture. So you committed a felony instead?" I asked. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh my God. Don't be so dramatic. A felony. Please, it is family stuff. It is not like I stole from a stranger." She walked past me into the living room and flopped onto the sofa. The sofa I realized now I had probably paid for. "Besides," she said, picking up a remote control and turning on the massive TV, "you weren't using your good credit anyway. It was just sitting there. It is a waste to have all that available credit and not use it. I actually helped your utilization ratio or whatever." I stood in the center of the room, feeling the blood drain from my face. She wasn't sorry. She didn't even think she had done anything wrong. In her mind, my credit score was a family resource, like the food in Mom's pantry, there for the taking if she was hungry enough. "Ruby," I said, and my voice was shaking now. "You destroyed my credit. My score dropped over 200 points. I can't buy a car. I can't refinance. If my landlord decides to sell, I can't rent a new place. You own your place," she countered, not looking away from the screen. "So you are fine. You are always fine. Stella. That is your thing. You will bounce back. You love fixing things. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the arrogance in the set of her jaw. I saw the complete lack of empathy in her eyes. She viewed me not as a sister, but as a utility. I was an appliance that provided stability, and she had simply plugged herself in. I walked over to the TV and stood in front of it, blocking her view. Hey, she said, craning her neck. Move. How long, I asked. How long have you been doing this? She sighed. A heavy, theatrical exhale. Since November. Okay. Are you happy I needed winter clothes? And then Christmas was coming up, and I wanted to get Mom that nice necklace. You bought Mom a necklace with my money, I whispered. The necklace Mom had worn to Easter brunch, the one she had paraded around, telling everyone what a thoughtful, generous daughter Ruby was. Technically, Ruby said, smirking, it was the bank's money. I felt a sudden, violent urge to grab the television and rip it off the wall. My hands curled into fists at my sides. You have to pay it off, I said. Now. You have to return all of this stuff. Sell whatever you can. And pay it off. I can't return it. She said. I threw away the boxes, and I can't pay it off right now. Stella, I told you. I am waiting on the job. Then I'm going to the police. I said. The room went silent. The laugh track from the TV show filled the air, jarring and artificial. Ruby looked at me. Her smirk vanished. You wouldn't, she said. Watch me. Stella, don't be a psycho. Mom and Dad would kill you. You are going to call the cops on your own sister for money. It is not about the money, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had suppressed for 30 years. It is about the fact that you looked at my life, the life I built from nothing, and decided you were entitled to burn it down because you wanted a bigger TV. It is just a credit score, she shouted, standing up. It is imaginary numbers, God. You are so vindictive. You just can't stand that I'm having a little fun while you sit in that boring house counting your pennies. I looked at her one last time. I looked at the stranger wearing my sister's face. I am done. Ruby. I turned and walked out. Stella, she screamed after me. If you tell Mom, I will deny it. I will tell them you gave me permission. I slammed the door, cutting off her voice. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the cheap laminate, vibrating with the aftershocks of the confrontation. I didn't go back to work. I drove home and sat in my living room with the blinds drawn. The silence of the townhouse was usually my sanctuary, but today it felt like a cage. I sat on my beige sofa, staring at the wall, replaying the conversation. You weren't using your good credit anyway. The entitlement was breathtaking. It was a rot that went deep, right to the bone. As the afternoon light faded into evening, my mind began to trawl through the past, pulling up memories I had carefully filed away under family quirk or just how things are. I thought about the car accident when I was 17. Ruby had been 14. She had taken Mom's car for a joyride while Mom was napping. She had backed it into the neighbor's brick mailbox, crushing the bumper. When Mom woke up, Ruby had been crying hysterically, hyperventilating. I had walked into the room, and Mom had looked at me. Stella, please, she is a mess. Just say you were moving the car to wash it. Your father will be so angry if he knows she took it. And I had done it. I had taken the lecture from Dad. I had paid for the repair out of my summer job money. Ruby had hugged me afterward and whispered, "You're the best." I thought about college. My junior year. Ruby had come to visit for a weekend. She had brought a group of friends I didn't know. They had thrown a party in my dorm room while I was at the library studying for finals. When I came back, the room was trashed, beer spilled on my laptop, a hole in the drywall, and Ruby was gone. She had left a note on a napkin. Things got crazy. Sorry. Had to catch a ride back. Love you. I had spent the entire night scrubbing the floor and patching the wall with toothpaste so I wouldn't lose my housing contract. When I called her the next day, she had laughed. Oh, Stella, you worry too much. It's college. You're supposed to have wild stories. It was always the same pattern. Ruby created chaos. I absorbed the impact. My parents praised me for being strong and coddled her for being fragile. But this wasn't a scratched bumper. This wasn't a hole in the drywall. This was fraud. My phone chimed. I looked at it, dreading a text from Ruby. It was an email notification. My work email. Synced to my phone. Subject action required. Background check, authorization. I frowned and opened it. It was from HR at Horizon Line Logistics. Dear Stella, as part of the final interview process for the Senior Logistics Manager position, we require an updated background check. This is standard procedure for all management roles involving budget oversight. Please sign the attached consent form authorizing a criminal background check and a full credit review. Please return this by Friday. My stomach dropped out. The promotion. I had been working toward this promotion for 5 years. It came with a 20% raise, a corner office, and real authority. It was the next step in the plan, and it required a credit review for a management role involving budget oversight. If they pulled my credit report right now, what would they see? They would see a woman who was $30,000 in debt. They would see maxed out cards. They would see a credit score that screamed high risk and poor judgment. They wouldn't see Stella the saver. They would see Stella the liability. I wouldn't get the job. In fact, in a company as strict as Horizon Line, I might lose the job I already had. Financial instability was a red flag for anyone with access to company accounts. Ruby hadn't just stolen my money. She had rigged a bomb under my career. I stood up and paced the small room. If I signed that form, I was exposed. If I didn't sign it, I withdrew from the promotion, which would look suspicious in itself. There was only one way to explain the credit report. I had to have an official record that the debt wasn't mine. I needed a police report number. I needed an identity theft affidavit. I needed to criminalize my sister to save myself. I looked at the clock. It was 7 in the evening. The police station would be open. The desk sergeant was always there. I went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. My hands were shaking. Family handles, family problems privately. My mother's voice echoed in my head. You are so vindictive. Ruby's voice sneered. I grabbed my purse. I grabbed the folder with the bank statements and the letters. I wasn't vindictive. I was cornered. The Haven Ridge County Police Department was not like the precincts on TV. It was a low brick building that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. The lighting was fluorescent and harsh, humming with a low-level electrical buzz that set my teeth on edge. I walked up to the front desk. A uniformed officer was typing on a computer. He didn't look up immediately. Can I help you? He asked. His eyes still on the screen. I need to speak to someone about financial crimes. I said. My voice was small. I cleared my throat and tried again. Louder. I need to report identity theft. He looked up then. His name tag said, Officer Vance. He had kind eyes but a tired face. Okay. Is this a new report? Yes. He reached under the counter and pulled out a clipboard with a thick form attached to it. You can start by filling this out. It asks for your information, the accounts involved, and the dates. When you are done, bring it back, and I will have an officer review it with you. I took the clipboard and sat on a hard plastic bench against the wall. The form was terrifyingly official. Incident report, victim information, nature of crime. I filled in my name, my address, my employer. Then I reached the section, Suspect Information. Do you have a suspect? Yes/no. I hovered the pen over the yes box. If I checked no, the investigation would likely stall. They would treat it as generic fraud. But if I checked yes, I checked yes. Name of suspect. I wrote Ruby Stewart. Relationship to victim, I wrote sister. The letters looked sharp and black against the white paper. It felt like a betrayal written in ink. I stared at the word sister. I thought about the Sunday dinners. I thought about the way my parents looked at her, with that protective, desperate love. They would never forgive me for this. This was the nuclear option. But then I thought about the smirk. You weren't using your good credit anyway. I stood up and walked back to the desk. I am done, I said. Officer Vance took the clipboard. He scanned it. He stopped at the suspect section. He looked up at me. You named a family member. He said, it wasn't a question. Yes, I said, Ms. Stewart. I need you to understand something before we proceed. Once you file this report, it becomes a criminal matter. The state picks it up. If we find evidence, we arrest her. You can't just call us in a week and ask us to drop it because your parents are upset. It is out of your hands. He was giving me an out. He was giving me a chance to walk away, to go home and pay off the $30,000 for the next 10 years, to let Ruby win again. I gripped the edge of the counter. I felt sick. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I understand. I said, "Are you sure?" he asked. "This is a bell you can't unring." I thought about the promotion. I thought about the townhouse. I thought about the silence I had bought and paid for, and how Ruby had filled it with noise and debt. "I am sure." I said, "Okay," he said, raising his voice slightly. He called out toward the back. "Detective Holloway, I have a walk-in for you." A door buzzed open, and a woman in plain clothes stepped out. She looked sharp, pragmatic. "Ms. Stewart," she asked, "come on back." I walked through the gate. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was nausea. Yes, but beneath it, there was something else, relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't covering for Ruby. I wasn't fixing the bumper. I wasn't cleaning the dorm room. I was telling the truth. I sat down in the detective's chair, folded my hands in my lap, and began to speak. And with every word, I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations begin to crack. The fallout did not happen immediately. There was a buffer period of 48 hours after I left the police station, a strange, suffocating silence that hung over my life like the low pressure before a tornado. I went to work. I sat at my desk. I moved shipping containers from point A to point B on a digital map. I drank coffee that tasted like battery acid. I waited. I knew the detectives were working. Officer Vance had explained the process. They would verify the bank records, pull the surveillance footage from the ATMs where the withdrawals had been made, and then they would pay a visit to apartment 4B on Elm Terrace. That visit happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a conference call with a supplier in Seattle when my personal phone, sitting face down on my desk, began to vibrate. It buzzed against the laminate with a violence that made me jump. I flipped it over. "Dad." I let it go to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it buzzed again. "Mom." I silenced it. Then, a text message from my mother appeared on the lock screen. "Answer the phone. Stella. Now." I felt a cold sweat break out along my hairline. I excused myself from the meeting, mumbling something about a vendor emergency, and walked out of the open plan office into the stairwell. The concrete stairwell was cold and echoed with the hum of the building's ventilation system. It was the only place I could hide. I stared at the phone. It started ringing again. "Mom." I pressed the green button and held it to my ear. "Hello, Stella." My mother's voice was a shriek, a sound so raw and high-pitched it distorted through the speaker. It wasn't the voice of the woman who baked casseroles or fussed over napkins. It was the voice of a cornered animal. "What have you done?" she screamed. "What have you done to your sister?" I leaned against the concrete wall, my legs feeling like water. "Mom, please calm down." "Calm down. Do not tell me to calm down." The police were just at her apartment. Stella. 2 detectives. They pounded on her door like she was a drug dealer. The neighbors were watching. Mrs. Gable from the church has a niece in that building, and she saw everything. I closed my eyes. "Did they arrest her?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They took her in for questioning." Elaine sobbed. "They put her in the back of a police car." Stella, my baby, in the back of a police car, because of you. Because you couldn't just pick up the phone and call us like a decent human being. "I called you," I said, the anger sparking in my chest, hot and defensive. "I called you for years. You never listened. You just told me to be the bigger person. So you send the police to drag her away," Elaine yelled. "For money." "It is just money." Stella. "It is $30,000, I shouted back, my voice echoing in the stairwell. "She stole $30,000 from me. Mom, she destroyed my credit. She committed fraud. She would have paid it back, Elaine insisted, her voice dropping into that familiar, terrifying certainty she always had when defending Ruby. She had a plan. She told us she was going to fix it. But you are just so vindictive. The word hit me like a physical slap. Vindictive. I am not being vindictive, I said, my voice shaking. I am protecting myself. She stole my identity. She borrowed your name, Elaine spat, because she was in trouble, because she needed help, and she knew you had plenty. But you have always been like this. You hoard everything. You sit in that house with your perfect savings account and your perfect job, and you look down on her because she struggles. I don't look down on her. I said, I wanted her to be an adult. She is more alive than you will ever be, Elaine said, and the venom in her tone was so pure it took my breath away. That is your problem, isn't it? You are jealous. Ruby lights up a room. Ruby has friends. Ruby has a life. And you are just cold. You are cold and hard. And now you are trying to ruin her because you can't stand that people love her more than they love you. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood there in the stairwell, gripping the phone, feeling a crack running down the center of my chest. Is that what you think? I whispered. I think you are a traitor, Elaine said. Do not come to the house. Do not call us. Until you fix this. Until you tell the police it was a mistake. You are not part of this family. The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the ventilation. I looked at the phone. I looked at the gray concrete steps. More alive. That was the metric. Ruby was chaotic, destructive, and a thief. But she was alive. I was responsible, steady, and the victim. But I was cold. I went back to my desk, sat down, and typed numbers into a spreadsheet until 5 o'clock. I didn't cry. I didn't feel like I could. I felt like I had been hollowed out with a spoon. 2 days later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Stewart, this is Mara Collins. I am an assistant prosecutor with the Haven Ridge County District Attorney's Office. I sat up straighter in my chair. I was at home, sitting at the kitchen table where the pile of evidence still lay. Though I had made copies for the police, yes, I said, this is Stella. I wanted to update you on the status of the case regarding Ruby Stewart. Ms. Collins said. Her voice was brisk, professional, and entirely devoid of the emotional hysteria that had defined my week, based on the evidence provided by Detective Halloway and the records from Brightway Credit Union. We are moving forward with charges. Okay, I said, because the total amount of the fraud exceeds $25,000, and because it involves the use of personal identifying information across multiple accounts. This qualifies as aggravated identity theft in the first degree. That is a felony. Ms. Stewart. I stopped breathing for a moment. A felony, I asked? Yes. Given the scope, the number of accounts, the duration of the activity, and the impersonation of your father as a co-signer, we are looking at a significant case. I swallowed hard. I had known it was bad. But hearing the word felony spoken by a prosecutor made it real in a way that made my stomach turn. Felony meant prison. Felony meant a permanent record. Felony meant Ruby's life, as she knew it, was over. What happens next? I asked. We are scheduling a preliminary hearing for next month. Ms. Collins said, you will likely be subpoenaed to testify. I wanted to prepare you for that, and I also wanted to ask, have you had contact with the defendant? No, I said. Not since the day I confronted her. Good. She said, keep it that way. If she reaches out, do not engage. Document everything. Defendants in these cases often try to manipulate the victim into dropping the charges. But I need you to understand, Ms. Stewart, this is not just up to you anymore. The state is the plaintiff. We are pursuing this because a crime was committed against the banking system as much as against you. I understand. I said. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. My parents thought I was holding the leash. They thought I could snap my fingers and make the police go away. But I had started an avalanche. I was just standing at the bottom of the mountain now, watching it come down. That night, the text started. I had blocked Ruby's number, but she was resourceful. She used a burner app, or maybe friends' phones. The messages arrived in a staccato rhythm, lighting up my bedroom in the dark. 11:14 p.m. Stella, please. I'm scared. They took my fingerprints. I can't go to jail. Please tell them it was a misunderstanding. 11:20 p.m. I'll pay you back. I swear. I'll get 2 jobs. I'll sign a contract. Just stop this. 11:45 p.m. Are you ignoring me? After everything we've been through, you're my sister. 12:10 a.m. You bitch. You think you're so perfect. I hope you rot. 12:30 a.m. Mom is crying nonstop. Dad is having chest pains. If he has a heart attack, it's on you. You're killing them. I lay in bed, watching the notifications scroll. I didn't reply. I remembered Mara Collins' advice. Document everything. Then, at 1:00 a.m., a text came that made me sit up. You better fix this, or I start talking. You know I know about the stuff from when we were kids. Family secrets. Stella, don't make me burn you too. I stared at the screen. I racked my brain. What secrets? I had lived a life of aggressive transparency. I had nothing to hide. But the threat wasn't about truth. It was about the willingness to cause pain. Ruby was signaling that there were no rules anymore. If I was going to use the law, she was going to use the mud. I took a screenshot of the text. My hands were shaking. I felt unsafe in my own bed. In the house I had bought to be my sanctuary. The professional blow landed on Friday. I was called into Dave's office at Horizon Line Logistics just after lunch. Dave was a good manager, fair, direct, usually jovial, but today, he wasn't smiling. He was sitting behind his desk, looking at a file folder as if it contained a dead mouse. Close the door. Stella, he said. I closed it. The glass walls of his office were frosted for privacy, but I could still see the blurry shapes of my coworkers moving outside. They were grabbing coffee, laughing, planning their weekends. Sit down, Dave said. I sat. We got the results of your background check back this morning, he said. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had known this was coming. But hope is a stubborn, stupid thing. I had hoped the bureaucracy would be slow. I had hoped the police report would have cleared it up by now. I can explain. I started. Dave held up a hand. Stella. The credit report shows over $30,000 in defaulted debt. It shows multiple accounts in collections. It shows a credit score that, well, it is below the threshold for anyone in a financial oversight role. It is identity theft, I said quickly, leaning forward. My sister. She stole my information. I have filed a police report. I am working with the prosecutor. None of that debt is mine. Dave sighed. He looked sympathetic. But it was the sympathy of a man who has to follow a policy manual. I believe you. Stella, I know you. You are the most organized person on this team. But corporate policy is black and white. We cannot promote someone to a senior logistics manager position with a flagged credit history. The risk assessment team won't allow it. So, I asked, my voice small. So, the promotion is on hold, he said. We have to pause the process. If you can get this cleared up, if you can get the credit bureaus to remove the flags and restore your score, we can revisit it. But for now, we have to open the requisition back up to other candidates. We can't leave the position vacant indefinitely. I felt tears stinging my eyes. I fought them back. I would not cry in front of my boss. Will I lose my current job? I asked. Dave hesitated. No, not right now. You are a project coordinator. You don't have signing authority on the company accounts. But, Stella, HR is aware of the situation. It is on your file now. You need to fix this fast. I walked out of his office feeling naked. Every glance from a coworker felt like an indictment. Did they know I had HR gossiped? Did they look at me and see a fraud risk? I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I pressed my forehead against the cold metal of the door. Ruby had taken the money. That was math. But this was my reputation. This was the career I had built hour by hour, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. She had taken that too. And she had done it for a television and some vodka. The isolation became total that weekend. I was usually not a heavy user of social media, but I had an Instagram account to keep up with extended family. On Saturday night, I was sitting on my couch, eating a sandwich I couldn't taste, scrolling mindlessly. A photo popped up from my cousin Ashley. It was a picture of a living room, my parents' living room. The coffee table was laden with food platters of sandwiches, bowls of chips, a cake. The room was crowded with aunts, uncles, and cousins. And there, in the center of the sofa, sat Ruby. She looked tragic. She was wearing no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was wrapped in an oversized cardigan, looking small and fragile. My mother had her arm around Ruby's shoulders, holding her tight. My father was standing behind the sofa, his hand resting protectively on Ruby's head. They looked like a fortress, a united front against the world. I read the caption, "Family is everything. When one of us is hurting, we all circle the wagons, praying for my cousin Ruby as she goes through this nightmare. We love you. Rubes, stay strong." Family. First unconditional. Love. I read the comments. "So sorry you guys are going through this. She is so lucky to have such supportive parents. Keep your head up. Ruby." There was no mention of me. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't in the caption. I wasn't in the comments. I had been erased, or rather, I had been replaced. In their narrative, I wasn't the victim, I was the villain. I was the unseen force causing this nightmare. Ruby was the victim of harassment, of trouble, of a cruel sister who involved the police. I zoomed in on my mother's face. She looked defiant. She looked like a martyr. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a loud thud and landed on the carpet. The unfairness of it choked me. I was the one eating a turkey sandwich alone in a house I could barely afford to heat because I was saving every penny for legal fees. I was the one whose promotion was dead. I was the one whose credit was ruined. And they were having a party to comfort the criminal. I stood up and paced the room. My chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe. The panic attack came on fast, a crushing weight that made my fingers tingle and my vision tunnel. I needed it to stop. I needed the pain to stop. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed my landline. I dialed the number for the Haven Ridge Police Department. I needed to talk to Officer Vance or Detective Holloway. I needed to tell them I made a mistake. "Officer Vance," I said when he picked up, my voice gasping. "It is Stella Stewart, Ms. Stewart. Is everything okay? Are you in danger?" "No," I said. Yes. I want to drop it. Drop what the charges, the report. I want to withdraw my statement." There was a long pause on the line. "Ms. Stewart," Vance said gently, "we talked about this. I know." I sobbed. "But I can't do it. My family, they are destroying me. I just want it to go away. If I say I gave her permission, if I say I forgot, can we just make it stop, Stella?" Vance said. And his use of my first name was a splash of cold water. "Listen to me. The prosecutor has the file. The grand jury is convening next week. We have the bank records. We have the surveillance video. We have the recorded calls where she pretended to be you. So I asked, even if you recant now, the district attorney isn't going to drop it. They will just charge you with filing a false police report and obstruction of justice. And they will likely still prosecute her for the bank fraud because the bank is a victim too." He paused. "You can't save her. Stella, you can only destroy yourself trying. Is that what you want?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, sliding down until I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor. "No," I whispered. "Then you have to hold the line," he said. "It is going to be hard. But you are doing the right thing." I hung up the phone. I sat on the floor for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum. I was trapped. I was locked on a roller coaster that was slowly ticking up the first hill, and there was no way to get off before the drop. The formal charge came 3 weeks later. The State of Weston versus Ruby Elaine Stewart. I received a subpoena in the mail. It was a terrifying document, printed on heavy paper. It commanded my presence at the Haven Ridge County Superior Court. It listed me as the victim. I stared at the word, victim. I had spent my whole life trying not to be that. I was the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't need help. My parents had raised me to be the safety net, not the one falling, but the word was accurate. I had been harmed. The insomnia was blinding by this point. I was sleeping 2, maybe 3 hours a night. I would wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, convinced I heard Ruby breaking into the house or my mother screaming my name. I needed help. I found a counseling center 3 towns over, far enough away that I wouldn't run into anyone who knew my family. I made an appointment with a doctor. Aris. Her office was beige and quiet. There was a sound machine making the noise of ocean waves. I sat on the sofa and spent the first 20 minutes just crying. I cried until my throat hurt. I told her everything: the credit cards, the promotion, the party I saw on Instagram, the word vindictive. Doctor. Aris listened. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind, intelligent eyes. She waited until I was done, until I had wiped my face with the tissues she provided. Stella, she said softly, I want to ask you a question. Okay, why is your loyalty to your family more important than your own survival? I stared at her. Because they are family, I said automatically. You don't turn your back on family, but they turned their back on you. Didn't they? She asked. I looked down at my hands. They think I betrayed them. Did you? I told the truth. I said, Doctor. Aris leaned forward. Stella, there is a difference between loyalty and enabling. Loyalty is standing by someone when they fall. Enabling is laying yourself down so they can walk over you, your parents. They have established a system. In that system, Ruby is the child, and you are the parent. That is how it feels, I whispered. And when you stepped out of that role, when you refused to be the parent who cleans up the mess, they attacked you. Not because you were wrong, but because you broke the system, their anger. It is not about you being vindictive. It is about them being terrified. Terrified of what I asked. Terrified that if you don't save Ruby, they might have to look at who she really is. And worse, they might have to look at who they are for raising her to be this way. I thought about the voicemail from Elaine. She is more alive than you. They hate me. I said, they are shaming you. Doctor, Aris corrected. Shame is a powerful weapon. It keeps people in line. But you don't have to accept it. You can hand it back. I left the session feeling exhausted. But lighter. The guilt was still there, heavy and wet like a wool coat in the rain. But the confusion was clearing. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the bad seed. I was just the only one in the Stewart family who had decided to stop pretending that fire didn't burn. I drove home through the darkening streets of Brook Hollow. I passed the turnoff for my parents' neighborhood. I felt a pull, a magnetic urge to turn the wheel, to drive to their house, to beg for forgiveness, to fix it. I kept the wheel straight. I drove past. I went home to my empty townhouse. I locked the door. I turned on the lights. I was alone. I was damaged. I was facing a trial that would tear my history apart. But as I stood in my kitchen, making a cup of tea, I realized something. The silence in the house wasn't expensive anymore. It wasn't waiting. It was just silence. And for the first time in weeks, it felt like peace. The seasons changed in Brook Hollow, while the legal system ground forward with the speed of a glacier. Summer bled into a crisp, brown autumn, and the leaves on the trees outside my townhouse turned the color of dried tobacco. I watched them fall, day by day, marking the passage of time in a life that felt suspended in amber. The initial adrenaline of reporting Ruby had faded, replaced by a dull, aching waiting game. My promotion at Horizon Line Logistics was still frozen, a carrot dangling just out of reach. Preserving my professional humiliation in amber as well, I went to work. I came home, and I waited for the phone to ring with news from the prosecutor's office. When the call finally came to schedule a meeting, it wasn't for a trial date, it was for a strategy session. I met Mara Collins in her office at the county courthouse. It was a small, windowless room stacked high with accordion files, smelling faintly of peppermint tea and old paper. Mara was exactly as she had been on the phone sharp. Pragmatic, and lacking the soft edges that people usually used when talking to victims of family crimes. She sat behind her desk, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad. "We are entering the discovery phase. Stella," she said, "the defense has requested all the documents we have. We are giving them the bank records, the affidavits, the police report. In turn, they have to give us what they have." "Do they have anything?" I asked. Mara shrugged. "Right now. Just a list of character witnesses. Your parents, mostly." I felt a familiar stone drop in my stomach. "They are going to testify." "Almost certainly," Mara said, "and I need you to be prepared for what that means. But before we get there, I want to clarify something for you. This is a criminal case. The state of Weston is prosecuting Ruby for breaking the law. Our goal is a conviction and sentencing. Restitution, getting your money back, is something the judge can order. But in cases like this, where the defendant has no assets, it is often symbolic. So I won't get the money back." I said, "It wasn't a question. Ruby is a bartender with $30,000 in debt and a potential felony record." Mara said bluntly, "You can't get blood from a stone. If you want to pursue the assets, she bought the electronics. The furniture you might need to file a separate civil suit, but the criminal court is about punishment, not repayment." I nodded. I didn't care about the furniture. I cared about the truth. "There is something else," Mara said, leaning forward. "In reviewing the file, I noticed something about the contact information. On 3 of the credit card applications, Ruby listed a secondary phone number. My parents' landline." I guessed. "Yes, and on the application for the personal loan, the billing address was initially listed as your parents' house before being switched to Elm Terrace 2 months later. That means for at least 6 weeks, statements were going to Martin and Elaine Stewart." I stared at the file in her hands. "They knew." I whispered. Mara looked at me with a steady, unpitying gaze. "It is highly likely they saw the mail, whether they opened it or whether Ruby intercepted it. We don't know. But the paper trail touches their house. That is why they are so defensive. Stella, they aren't just protecting her. They are protecting their own negligence. If they admit a crime happened, they have to admit they watched it happen and did nothing." I left the courthouse with a new layer of nausea coating my throat. They knew. The idea that my parents had been unwitting enablers was painful enough. The idea that they had seen bills in my name, addressed to their house, and simply handed them to Ruby without calling me, that was something else. That was complicity. I needed to know how deep it went. That weekend, I went into my garage. Stashed on a high shelf was a plastic storage bin labeled Mom, Dad, important papers. 3 years ago, when they had decided to downsize their clutter, which mostly meant moving their clutter into my house, they had asked me to store it. "Just keep it safe. Stella, you are the organized one. We would lose our heads if they weren't screwed on." I pulled the bin down. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight coming through the garage window. I sat on the concrete floor and popped the lid. It was a chaotic jumble of tax returns from the 1990s. Warranties for appliances they no longer owned, and old medical records. I sifted through it, my hands dusty, looking for anything that referenced accounts or names. I found it near the bottom, a manila envelope labeled Girls Savings. I opened it. Inside were old savings bonds for Ruby and me. Most of them cashed out years ago. But behind the bonds was a single sheet of paper that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a document from a local bank, dated 8 years ago. I would have been 24. Authorization to transfer funds. It authorized the transfer of $2,500 from an account in the name of Stella Stewart to an account held by Martin Stewart. At the bottom was a signature, Stella Stewart. I stared at the signature. It was looped and slanted. It looked nothing like my handwriting. It looked like someone trying to write in cursive who hadn't practiced since the 3rd grade. It looked like Ruby's handwriting. And then, the memory hit me. I was 24. I had just finished my master's degree and was moving into my first real apartment. I needed money for the security deposit. I remembered calling my mother, asking about the savings account my grandmother had started for me when I was born. I knew there was supposed to be a few $1,000s in it. "Oh, honey," Elaine had said on the phone, her voice breezy. "That account, we closed that years ago to pay for your tuition books. Don't you remember I thought I had a scholarship for books?" I had said, "No, you are confused." She had insisted, "It is gone. You must have misunderstood." I had believed her. I had felt stupid for asking. I had put the deposit on a credit card and spent 6 months paying it off, eating ramen noodles and feeling guilty for being greedy. But the account hadn't been empty. It had been drained. By this piece of paper, 8 years ago, Ruby would have been 21. I held the paper, feeling the heat of betrayal radiate off it. They hadn't just watched Ruby steal my identity this year. They had taught her how to do it. They had established a precedent. Stella's money is family money, and if we need it, we take it. I stood up. I didn't brush the dust off my jeans. I walked to my car, threw the paper on the passenger seat, and drove to my parents' house. It was a Sunday, usually the time for the family dinner I was no longer invited to. The house looked the same as always, the lawn manicured, the hedges trimmed. It looked like the home of honest people. I didn't knock. I used my key, the one they hadn't asked for back yet, and walked into the kitchen. Martin and Elaine were sitting at the small breakfast table, drinking coffee. The room was silent. When I walked in, they both jumped. "Stella," Elaine said, her hand going to her throat. "What are you doing here?" I didn't say hello. I walked to the table and slammed the piece of paper down in front of them. "Tell me what this is," I said. My father looked at the paper, then at me. His face hardened. "You break into our house and start making demands. Look at the paper." "Dad," I said. Elaine picked it up. I watched her eyes scan the document. I saw the color drain from her face, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. Her hands started to tremble. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "In the box you told me to keep safe," I said. "The box of important papers. You forgot it was in there, didn't you?" Elaine put the paper down. She wouldn't look at me. "It is from 8 years ago." "Stella, why are you digging up ancient history?" "Because it is a forgery," I shouted. "That is not my signature. Ruby signed my name, and you transferred the money to your account. You told me that account was empty. You told me I was confused." Elaine looked at Martin. Martin looked at the wall. "We had no choice," Elaine said, her voice thin. "No choice," I asked. "It was $2,000. Mom, I needed that for my apartment. I went into debt because you stole it." "We didn't steal it," Elaine snapped, finding her courage in indignation. "We borrowed it. Ruby was in trouble. She had a medical emergency." "What emergency?" I demanded. "What emergency costs exactly $2,500 and required you to forge my signature instead of asking me?" "She had a scare," Elaine said, waving her hand vaguely. "She thought she was sick. She needed tests." "We didn't want to worry you. You were so busy with your new job and your big city life. We handled it." I laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. A scare. "You mean she was dramatic? You mean she panicked? She was suffering?" Elaine cried. "But you don't care about that. You never care about how she feels. You just care about your precious money." I looked at my father. "And you?" I asked. "You allowed this?" Martin stood up. He was a big man, and he used his size to intimidate, looming over the table. "That is enough. Stella, you are not going to come into my house and interrogate your mother. I am asking why you let my sister rob me 8 years ago. We did what we had to do for the family," Martin shouted. "And frankly, I am disgusted. You are digging through old boxes, looking for dirt, trying to build a case against your own flesh and blood. Who does that? What kind of person spends their weekends hunting for reasons to destroy their family? A person who wants to know why she is the only one paying the price," I yelled back. "You are ungrateful," Martin said, pointing a finger at my face. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us, by tallying up every cent we ever moved around to keep this family afloat." "Moved around," I repeated, incredulous. "You stole it. You gaslit me. You made me think I was crazy so you could cover for her. Get out, Martin said. I looked at Elaine. She was weeping now, her face buried in her hands, making soft, wounded noises. Mom, I said. She didn't look up. Just go. Stella. She sobbed into her palms. Just go away. You have caused enough pain. I grabbed the paper from the table. I am keeping this, I said. Keep it, Martin yelled. Frame it. Put it on your wall so you can look at it and feel righteous while you die alone. I walked out of the house. I was shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition of my car. I drove 2 blocks and pulled over, leaning my head against the steering wheel, gasping for air. They hadn't denied it. They hadn't apologized. They had just blamed me for finding out. I showed the document to Mara Collins the next day. She looked at it, her expression grim. This establishes a pattern, she said. It shows that the identity theft wasn't an isolated incident of desperation. It was a learned behavior, and it shows your parents have a history of facilitating it. Will it help the case, I asked. It helps the narrative. Mara said, but I have to warn you. Stella, the defense is going to come hard at you. I spoke with Ruby's public defender. He is signaling that their strategy is going to be character assassination. What can they say, I asked. I have never broken a law in my life. They are going to paint you as the vindictive older sister. Mara said, they will say you are emotionally unstable, that you are jealous of Ruby, and that you are using the legal system to punish her for family grievances. They will use the fact that you are estranged from your parents to suggest that you are the problem, not them. Let them try, I said, though my stomach twisted. It is going to be ugly. Stella, they will try to humiliate you. They will try to make you look petty. Are you ready for that? I went home and stared at my ceiling. Was I ready? I thought about the office whispers. I thought about the family gathering I saw on Instagram. I thought about Martin's face, red with rage, calling me ungrateful. If I dropped the charges now, the humiliation would stop. I could move away. I could start over. I could let them win. The temptation was sweet and heavy. It tasted like sleep. I went to see Dr. Aris. I can't take it. I told her. I want to quit. I want to call Mara and tell her I lied. Doctor. Aris looked at me from her armchair. And what happens then, she asked. Then it stops. The fighting stops. Does it? Or does the fighting just go back underground? I don't care. I said, I am tired of being the villain. Stella, Doctor, Aris said gently, if you drop this now, what lesson do you teach your family that they won? I said, no. She said, you teach them that intimidation works. You teach them that if they scream loud enough, if they shame you hard enough, if they threaten you enough, you will fold. You validate their reality. You confirm that you exist only to serve them. Is that the life you want? I looked at the sound machine in the corner. I listened to the fake ocean waves. No, I said, then you have to walk through the fire, she said. Not because you hate them, but because you have to love yourself enough to say no. The deposition was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in November. It was held in a conference room at a private law firm downtown. The room was all glass and mahogany, sterile and freezing cold. I sat on one side of a long oval table. Mara Collins sat next to me. On the other side sat Ruby. She looked different. She was wearing a modest gray dress I had never seen before. Her hair was brushed and simple. She looked young, scared, and innocent. She didn't look at me. Next to her was her public defender, a harried-looking man named Mr. Gorski with stains on his tie, but sitting in the corner, watching like hawks, were Martin and Elaine. I felt their eyes on me. I kept my gaze fixed on the court reporter's hands. Mr. Gorski began the questioning. Miss Stewart, he said, looking at his notes. You claim that you had no knowledge of these accounts. I did not claim it. I said, I stated it. It is a fact. Right, Gorski said. But isn't it true that you and your sister have a history of sharing expenses? No. I said, didn't you pay for her car repair 3 years ago? I gifted her the money for a repair. I said, I did not share an expense. And didn't your parents help you with your down payment? I paid them back. I said, but there is a flow of money in the family. Isn't there a sort of informal economy? No, I said firmly. There is me paying for things, and them taking things. That is not an economy. It is parasitism. Mr. Gorski sighed. Miss Stewart, you seem very angry. Would you say you are a resentful person? Objection, Mara said. Relevance. I am trying to establish the witness's state of mind. Gorski said. She seems determined to punish her sister. I am determined to clear my name. I said, cutting him off. Mr. Gorski shifted gears. Isn't it true that you benefited from the furniture in the apartment on Elm Terrace? Did you not visit the apartment? Did you not sit on the sofa? I visited once. I said, I sat on the sofa for 10 minutes. I didn't know I paid for it. So you admit you used the assets purchased with these funds. I admit I sat on a piece of fabric. I said, if that counts as usage, then yes. But I didn't sign the credit card slip. He kept going for hours. He asked about birthday presents I had given Ruby. He asked if I was jealous of Ruby's social life. He asked if I was depressed. He asked if I had ever been medicated for anxiety. He was trying to make me look crazy. He was trying to make the identity theft look like a misunderstanding between two sisters who just couldn't communicate. But I held on. I breathed. I channeled the cold, hard silence of my townhouse. I gave short, factual answers. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. When it was over, I felt drained, but unbroken. Mr. Gorski gathered his papers. He looked tired. He looked like a man who knew he was losing. Then, the door to the conference room opened. A man walked in. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He had silver hair, a deep tan, and a briefcase made of Italian leather. The air in the room seemed to change, shifting toward the scent of money and expensive cologne. I knew who he was. Everyone in Haven Ridge County knew who he was. Conrad Ellis, the most aggressive, expensive defense attorney in the state. He defended corrupt politicians and wealthy CEOs. He did not defend unemployed bartenders with public defenders. Mr. Gorski looked up, surprised. Mr. Ellis, I am taking over as lead counsel for Miss Stewart, Ellis said, his voice a smooth baritone. He walked over to Ruby and placed a hand on her shoulder. Ruby looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Mara Collins stiffened beside me. Mr. Ellis, she said, we weren't notified of a substitution of counsel. I just filed the paperwork, Ellis said, flashing a shark-like smile. I am getting up to speed. But looking at this deposition, well, I think we have a lot to discuss regarding the admissibility of this so-called evidence. I looked at my parents in the corner. Elaine was beaming. She looked triumphant. Martin looked pale, but resolute. My mind raced. Conrad Ellis charged $500 an hour. Minimum. A retainer for a felony case like this would be $50,000. Easy. Maybe more. Ruby didn't have $50, let alone $50,000. I looked at my father's hands. They were clenched in his lap. I noticed his watch was gone. The gold Rolex he had received for his retirement. The one he was so proud of. It wasn't on his wrist. And I remembered something else. My mother had mentioned months ago, before the world ended, that they were finally close to paying off their mortgage. They had been looking forward to being debt-free. I looked at them, and I knew. They had done it. They had remortgaged the house. They had sold the watch. They had raided their retirement accounts. They were burning their own future to the ground to hire a shark to attack me. They weren't just supporting Ruby emotionally. They were financing my destruction. Conrad Ellis looked at me across the table. His eyes were cold blue chips of ice. Ms. Stewart, he said, I look forward to cross-examining you at trial. I felt a chill go down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The game had just changed. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was war. And my parents had just bought a nuclear weapon. I stood up. My legs were trembling, but I locked my knees. I look forward to it too. I said, I walked out of the room, past my parents who refused to meet my eyes, and into the hallway. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. They had sacrificed everything for her, again. But this time, I wasn't going to pay the bill. I was going to make sure the judge presented it to them. The local news segment aired on a Tuesday evening, sandwiched between a report on a high school football championship and the 5-day weather forecast. I didn't see it live. I was in my kitchen, aggressively scrubbing a pot that was already clean, trying to work off the nervous energy that had become my constant companion. But the next morning at Horizon Line Logistics, I knew. The atmosphere in the office had shifted. Usually, the break room was a cacophony of coffee grinders and complaints about the morning traffic. Today, it was hushed. As I walked in to put my lunch in the refrigerator, 3 of my coworkers, people I had worked with for 5 years, people who had signed my birthday card, stopped talking mid-sentence. They looked at their mugs. They looked at the floor. One of them, a junior analyst named Greg, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Morning, Stella," he said, his voice too loud. "Morning," I said. I walked back to my desk, my neck prickling. I opened my email and saw a message from a friend in accounting, someone I trusted. "Hey, just a heads up. Channel 8 ran a story last night about family identity theft." They didn't use names, but they mentioned a local logistics coordinator in Brook Hollow whose sister stole $30,000. "People are talking. Just wanted you to know." I felt the blood drain from my face. Anonymous details. That was the phrase reporters used. But in a town the size of Brook Hollow, anonymous details were just breadcrumbs leading straight to my door. For the rest of the week, I was a ghost in my own office. Conversations died when I entered rooms. I heard whispers in the bathroom stalls. "Can you imagine calling the cops on your sister? I heard her parents have to sell their house to pay for the legal fees." That is so cold. I wasn't the victim to them. I was the source of the drama. I was the woman who had aired her dirty laundry on the 6 o'clock news. Even if I hadn't asked for the coverage, the shame was a physical weight, a heavy wet blanket draped over my shoulders as I typed my spreadsheets and pretended I couldn't hear the judgment buzzing in the air like flies. 2 nights before the trial was set to begin, the storm broke. It was late, past 11 o'clock. A cold rain was lashing against the windows of my townhouse, rattling the panes in their frames. I was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by legal pads, reviewing my testimony notes for the 100th time. November 14th, visa application, false address, January 3rd, personal loan, false cosigner. There was a pounding on my front door. Not a knock, a pounding. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the peephole. It was Ruby. She was soaked. Her hair was plastered to her skull, and her mascara was running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked manic, her eyes wide and wild. "Open up, Stella," she screamed, her voice muffled by the wood. "I know you are in there. I see the light." I debated calling the police immediately. My hand hovered over my phone, but something curiosity, pity, or maybe just the old habit of opening the door when she knocked stopped me. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Ruby pushed past me, bringing the smell of rain and stale cigarette smoke into my clean living room. She was shivering, her hands shaking violently. "You have to stop it," she said, spinning around to face me. "You have to fix this." I closed the door to shut out the rain. "Go home. Ruby, you aren't supposed to be here. If the prosecutor finds out—" "Screw the prosecutor," she yelled. "Do you know what they are going to do to me?" Conrad told me. "If I get convicted, I could go to prison." "Stella, prison. For what?" "For shopping for a felony," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking of my own hands. "You committed a felony. I didn't hurt anyone," she cried, pacing the room, her wet sneakers squeaking on my hardwood floor. "It is just banks. They have insurance." "Why are you doing this to me? Why do you hate me so much?" "I don't hate you," I said. "I hate what you did. I hate that you stole my name. I hate that you made me feel unsafe in my own life." She stopped pacing and looked at me. Her face crumpled, shifting in an instant from rage to that little girl helplessness she had weaponized for decades. "Stella, please," she whimpered. "I am scared. I can't go to jail. I will die in there. Just tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission over the phone and you forgot. You can say you were stressed at work. They will believe you. You are Stella. You are perfect." I stared at her, even now, facing prison. Her solution was for me to lie. Her solution was for me to destroy my credibility to save her comfort. "I can't do that," I said. "It would be perjury." "Who cares?" she screamed, the rage snapping back into place. "It is family. You do it for family." "Mom said you would understand." The words hung in the air. "Mom said what I asked." Ruby froze. She looked like she had said too much. But the dam was broken. She threw her hands up. "Mom said you would get over it." Back when I took the college money, when I had that thing, the medical emergency, I said, the one that cost $2,500, it wasn't a medical emergency. Ruby spat. "I owed money to some guys. Bad guys. I was terrified. Mom didn't have the cash." She said, "Your sister doesn't need the money the way you do right now. She said you were strong. She said you would figure it out because you always figure it out. She said, Stella will understand, she always does." I felt the ground tilt beneath my feet. Your sister doesn't need the money the way you do right now. It wasn't just theft. It was a philosophy. My parents had looked at my stability not as an achievement, but as a surplus they could harvest to feed Ruby's chaos. They had decided, years ago, that I was the designated donor in this family, and my consent was irrelevant because I was strong. "So you just took it," I whispered, "because Mom said I wouldn't mind being robbed." "We were protecting you," Ruby insisted, "from the truth. We didn't want you to worry about my problems. No." I said, "You didn't want to hear me say no." I walked to the door and opened it. The rain was still falling in sheets. "Get out." "Ruby?" She looked at the open door, then back at me. Her face twisted into a sneer, stripping away the last pretense of sisterhood. "You are pathetic," she hissed. "You think this makes you powerful? It just makes you alone. Look at you. You are 32 years old and you have nothing but a credit score and an empty house. I have my integrity," I said. "Integrity doesn't keep you warm." "Stella," she said, stepping onto the porch, "you are going to win your little court case. Congratulations. And you are going to end up old and bitter with perfect credit and no one at your bedside. You will die exactly how you lived, alone." She slammed the door. The frame rattled. The sound echoed in the silence she left behind. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain into place. Then I went into the kitchen and sat on the floor, listening to the rain, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones like a frost. She was right. I was alone, but for the first time, I realized that being alone was safer than being with them. The Haven Ridge County Superior Court was a fortress of stone and glass, designed to make you feel small. On the first morning of the trial, the sky was a bruised purple, clearing after the storm. I walked through the metal detectors, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I was wearing my navy suit, the one I wore for important client meetings. I carried my purse like a shield. I entered courtroom 4. It smelled of lemon polish and old anxiety. Mara Collins was already there at the prosecutor's table. She looked calm. Shuffling papers, she nodded at me. "Ready?" she asked. "As I will ever be," I said. I sat down in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table. I couldn't sit at the table itself until I testified, but I wanted to be close. Then the side door opened, and they walked in. Ruby was first. She was wearing a soft pink cardigan and a knee-length skirt. She looked demure. She looked like a Sunday school teacher. She looked nothing like the woman who had screamed at me in the rain 2 nights ago. Behind her walked Conrad Ellis, smooth and expensive in a charcoal suit, and behind him were Martin and Elaine. My parents walked with their heads high, but their eyes were fixed on the middle distance. They moved like soldiers in enemy territory. They sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the defense table. They did not look at me, not once. They sat 5 feet away, separated by a wooden railing and a lifetime of choices. I looked at the back of my mother's head, at the blonde dye job I knew she touched up every 3 weeks. I looked at the stoop of my father's shoulders. I felt a phantom limb pain where my family used to be. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Vance entered. She was a woman with iron-gray hair and a face that suggested she had heard every lie ever told and was impressed by none of them. The trial began. Opening statements were a study in contrast. Mara stood up first. She was concise. She spoke to the jury, 12 strangers who looked tired and confused, with a clear, steady voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about trust and how it was weaponized. The evidence will show that the defendant, Ruby Stewart, systematically used the personal information of her sister, Stella Stewart, to fraudulently obtain over $30,000 in credit. This was not an accident. This was a calculated series of actions applications, false addresses, forged signatures designed to deceive financial institutions and exploit a sibling's creditworthiness. She sat down. Then Conrad Ellis rose. He buttoned his jacket with a fluid motion. He walked to the jury box, leaning on the railing, smiling like a favorite uncle. "We have all made mistakes," he began, his voice warm and forgiving. "We have all had moments where life got overwhelming. Ruby Stewart is not a criminal mastermind. She is a young woman who found herself in a financial hole and panicked. She made clumsy financial choices. She borrowed from the person she thought would support her sister. But instead of support, she received handcuffs. The prosecution wants you to see a fraud. We will show you a family tragedy, driven by a sister who is using this court to settle a personal score rooted in long-standing resentment." I dug my fingernails into my palms. Clumsy financial choices. As if she had tripped and accidentally filled out a credit card application with a fake address. I took the stand after lunch. The walk from the gallery to the witness box felt miles long. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down. The wood of the chair was hard. The microphone was a black snake rising to meet my face. Mara guided me through the basics: my name, my job, my relationship to the defendant. Then we got to the timeline. "Can you tell the court what happened on October 12th? Mara asked. "I was at the grocery store," I said. My voice was shaky at first, but I forced it to steady. "I was buying food for the week. My card was declined. And did you know why? No. I had sufficient funds. Or I thought I did. I described the discovery, the late night with the laptop, the letters from the bank, the realization about the Elm Terrace address. How did this impact you?" Mara asked. I looked at the jury. A woman in the back row was looking at me with pity. A man in the front row looked bored. I lost a promotion I had worked 5 years for. I said, "My credit score dropped 200 points. I couldn't sleep. I was receiving calls from collection agencies at my desk. I felt violated. I felt like the foundation of my life had been pulled out from under me." "Thank you," Mara said. "Your witness." Conrad Ellis stood up. He didn't approach the stand immediately. He took a sip of water. He let the silence stretch, making me wait. "Ms. Stewart," he said finally, "you have a good job, don't you?" "Yes," I said. "And you own your own home?" "Yes." "You are financially comfortable?" "I am responsible." I said. Ellis smiled. "Of course. Responsible. And your parents, Martin and Elaine, they helped you achieve that stability, didn't they?" "They raised me," I said. "Didn't they give you $5,000 for a down payment on your house?" "Yes," I said, "and I paid them back." "And didn't they pay for your college textbooks?" I paused. I thought about the forged document. They told me they did. I said carefully, "So you have received financial support from your family?" Ellis said, "But when your younger sister needed support, when she was drowning, you didn't want to help her. I would have helped her if she had asked." I said, "But she didn't ask. She stole. She borrowed," Ellis corrected, "with the intent to repay. Did she not tell you she intended to pay it back?" "She told me that after she was caught." I said, "Ms. Stewart, isn't it true that you have always been jealous of Ruby? That you resent the attention she gets from your parents?" "No." I said. Ellis leaned in. Isn't it true that you are pursuing these charges not because you care about the money which you can afford to lose, but because you want to punish her for being the favorite? I felt a flash of heat. I looked at my parents. They were staring at Ellis, nodding slightly. This was their narrative. This was the story they told themselves to sleep at night. I am pursuing these charges because she committed a crime, I said, my voice cutting through the humid air of the courtroom. The amount of money is irrelevant. The fact that she is my sister makes it worse, not better. It means she used my love to rob me. Ellis paused. He looked at the jury, gauging their reaction. No further questions. He said, I stepped down. My legs were trembling, but my head was high. I had said it. I had refused to let him twist me into the bitter spinster he wanted me to be. The next witness was Sarah, the fraud specialist from Brightway Credit Union. She was professional, clinical. She explained the IP addresses. She explained the digital signatures. Then Mara approached the bench. Your Honor, the prosecution wishes to introduce Exhibit G. These are audio recordings of phone calls made to the Brightway Credit Union Collections Department on February 3rd and February 10th. Ellis objected. Foundation, Your Honor. We haven't established who is on the call. The witness can authenticate the source of the call. Mara argued. Overruled, Judge Vance said. Play the tape. The courtroom fell silent. A technician pressed a button on a laptop connected to the speaker system. There was a hiss of static. Then, a voice filled the room. Operator Brightway Collections. This is Mark. Who am I speaking with? Voice, Hi, this is Stella Stewart. I closed my eyes. It wasn't my voice. It was higher, thinner, breathless with a nervous energy that I knew intimately. It was Ruby. Operator, hi Ms. Stewart. We are calling about the past due balance on your visa. When can we expect a payment? Voice, I know. I know. I am so sorry. I get paid next Friday. Can I pay like $200? Then I promise. My hours got cut. Operator. We can note that. But the account is still delinquent. Can you verify your address for me? Voice, it is. Wait. Which one do you have, Operator? We have the Elm Terrace address. Voice. Right? Yes. That is it. Sorry. I am just really stressed. Mara stopped the tape. Ms. Sarah, Mara asked, can you tell us what phone number this call originated from? Yes, Sarah said, looking at a document. The call log shows it originated from a landline registered to Martin and Elaine Stewart at 15 Oak Lane. The courtroom murmured, a low ripple of sound that moved through the benches. And the date of this call, Mara asked. February 3rd. Mara turned to the jury. February 3rd. At the time of this call, records show the real Stella Stewart was clocked into her office building at Horizon Line Logistics. She was in a budget meeting. She was not calling a bank from her parents' landline. She looked at the defense table. Someone was at Martin and Elaine Stewart's house, using their phone, pretending to be Stella, to negotiate a debt that Martin and Elaine claimed they knew nothing about. I looked at my parents. Elaine had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Martin was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. They were trapped. The call proved Ruby was lying about being Stella, but the fact that it came from their house, that suggested they were in the room, or at the very least, they were allowing Ruby to use their home as the base of operations for her fraud. It undermined everything. It undermined the idea that this was just a clumsy mistake by a girl living alone. It looked like a conspiracy. Ellis looked unbothered, but I saw him scribble furiously on his legal pad. He knew this was bad. He knew the narrative of the innocent family was cracking under the weight of the recorded truth. Mara played the second call. Voice, please. You can't call my work. If you call my work, I will get fired. My parents are going to help me. They said they would help with the next payment. Just give me 2 weeks. My parents are going to help me. The words echoed in the courtroom. Ruby had told the bank that her parents were helping her pay off the debt on the fraudulent card. I looked at the jury again. The woman who had looked at me with pity was now looking at Martin and Elaine with something else. Suspicion. Disgust. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was sadder than that. It was the final death of the hope that maybe, just maybe, they hadn't known the full extent of it. They knew. They were helping her manage the payments to keep the scheme afloat. They were helping her tread water while she drowned me. Mara ended the questioning. No further questions. Judge Vance looked at the clock. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I stood up. The room was buzzing. Ruby turned to her parents. She looked frantic, whispering something to Elaine. Elaine shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Martin stood up and put his arm around Elaine, steering her toward the exit, his face a mask of furious denial. They walked past me. For a second, just a second. Martin's eyes met mine. There was no love in them. There was no apology. There was only the cold, hard hate of a man who had been exposed. I watched them go. Then I turned to Mara. That was the nail. Wasn't it, I asked? Mara nodded grimly. That was the nail. I walked out of the courtroom into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear. I was alone, just as Ruby had predicted. But as I walked to my car, I didn't feel bitter. I felt clean. The truth was out. It was recorded. It was public. And no matter what they said tomorrow, they could never take that back. The courtroom air was stale, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, persistent drone. I sat behind the prosecutor's table, my hands folded in my lap, watching my father walk to the witness stand. Martin Stewart looked older than I had ever seen him. He wore his Sunday suit, a navy blue that had gone slightly shiny at the elbows, and he moved with a heaviness that commanded sympathy. He looked like a man who had worked hard all his life, a man who fixed lawnmowers and paid his taxes. He did not look like a man who had financed a criminal defense with his retirement fund to destroy his own daughter. He took the oath, his hand trembling slightly on the Bible. Conrad Ellis approached him with the gentle reverence one might show a war hero. "Mr. Stewart," Ellis began, his voice soft. "Can you tell the jury about your relationship with your daughters?" Martin cleared his throat. He looked at Ruby, then quickly away. He did not look at me. "I love them both," he said. "They are my world. Elaine and I, we tried to give them everything. We wanted them to be close. We raised them to share. To share," Ellis asked. "Yes. Toys, clothes, secrets. That is what sisters do. They share everything." Ellis nodded, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "And when it came to finances, Mr. Stewart, were you aware of the specific arrangements between Stella and Ruby?" Martin shook his head, a look of bewildered innocence settling on his face. "Not really. I am old-fashioned. I don't understand all this digital banking, the apps, the credit scores. To me, money is just, it is a family resource. If one person has it, the other person can use it. Honestly, I assumed Stella knew. I assumed they were working it out between them." "So you believed Ruby had permission?" "Absolutely," Martin said, his voice firming up. "Ruby is a good girl. She wouldn't steal. She told us she and Stella had an arrangement. I believed her because, well, why wouldn't I? They are sisters, and when you found out Stella had gone to the police," Martin's face crumbled. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his eyes. I was heartbroken. It felt like a betrayal. We could have fixed this. We are a family. You don't call the police on family. It was a tragic misunderstanding that got out of hand because Stella can be very rigid. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if a rib had cracked. Rigid. That was the new word. Yesterday I was vindictive. Today I was rigid. "Thank you." "Mr. Stewart," Ellis said. Mara Collins stood up. She didn't walk toward him immediately. She stood behind her table, shuffling a stack of papers. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "Mr. Stewart," she said, looking up, "you say you don't understand credit. Is that correct?" "I am not a banker," Martin said defensively, "but you understand debt. Don't you? You have a mortgage. You have bought cars. You understand that if you borrow money, you have to pay it back." "I suppose." Mara picked up a piece of paper. Mr. Stewart, we have phone records from your home landline. Between January and March of this year, there were 12 incoming calls from the collections department of Brightway Credit Union. 12. Martin shifted in his seat. We get a lot of spam calls, he mumbled. These weren't spam calls, Mara said. These were calls asking for Stella Stewart regarding a past due debt. You answered 3 of them. We have the logs. Martin stayed silent. Did you tell Stella that a bank was calling your house looking for her? Mara asked. No, Martin said. Why not I? I didn't want to bother her. Mara raised an eyebrow. You didn't want to bother her. A collection agency is calling your home, looking for your daughter who lives across town. And you decided that telling her would be a bother. She has a stressful job, Martin burst out, gripping the railing of the witness box. She is always talking about how tired she is. I thought it was a mistake. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. I was trying to protect her stress levels. So to protect her, Mara said, her voice icy. You hid the fact that her identity was being used to run up thousands of dollars in debt. You let the calls keep coming. I didn't know it was fraud, Martin insisted. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. Or, Mara said, stepping closer, did you not tell her because you knew exactly who was responsible for those debts? And you didn't want Stella to find out? Objection, Ellis shouted. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said. Mara lowered her paper. Mr. Stewart, do you love your daughters equally? Martin looked offended. Of course I do. Then why, Mara asked, did you mortgage your home to pay for a lawyer to attack one of them, while leaving the other one to deal with $30,000 in theft alone? Objection, Ellis roared. Withdrawn, Mara said calmly. No further questions. Martin stepped down. He looked shaken. As he walked back to his seat, he passed me. I looked at him. I looked for the father who had taught me to ride a bike. I saw only a stranger who had sold his house to prove I was a liar. Elaine was next. My mother walked to the stand with the fragility of a glass ornament. She clutched a tissue in her hand. She looked at the jury with wide, watery eyes. Conrad Ellis treated her even more gently than he had Martin. Mrs. Stewart, he said, tell us about Ruby. Elaine sniffled. She is special. She feels things very deeply. She has always been fragile. The world is it is too hard for her sometimes. She gets overwhelmed. And Stella. Stella is strong, Elaine said. She has always been the independent one. She doesn't need us the way Ruby does. Ellis nodded sympathetically. When you heard about the charges, Mrs. Stewart, what went through your mind? I couldn't believe it, Elaine said, her voice trembling. It felt like a nightmare. I knew Ruby had made some mistakes with money. She is not good with numbers. But to call it a crime, to call the police, it was a cruel overreaction. A cruel overreaction. Ellis repeated, yes, if Stella had just come to us, we would have worked something out as a family. We always do. We would have paid it back slowly. But she went nuclear. She wanted to hurt her sister. I really believe that. Why, Ellis asked. Elaine looked at me then. Her eyes were sad. But behind the sadness was a steely resolve. Because she is jealous, Elaine whispered. She has always been jealous of Ruby's spirit. Ruby is fun. Ruby is light. And Stella is just so serious. I think she resented that we had to help Ruby more. She wanted to punish us for loving Ruby. I sat frozen. It was the narrative she had spun for herself. I was the villain because I had boundaries. Ruby was the victim because she had none. Ellis finished his questioning. He looked satisfied. He had painted a picture of a bitter, vindictive spinster attacking a fragile, misunderstood flower. Mara stood up. Mrs. Stewart, she said, you say Ruby is fragile. Yes, Elaine said. Very. She is 29 years old, isn't she? Yes, she has a driver's license. She has had jobs. She lives alone. Yes, but you treat her like a child. Mara said, you say she is not good with numbers. Is she good enough with numbers to fill out a credit card application with a false address? She made a mistake, Elaine cried. Mara picked up a document. Mrs. Stewart, I want to ask you about a specific conversation. You heard the testimony about Ruby coming to Stella's apartment 2 nights ago. I heard it. Yes. Ruby claimed that years ago, when she took money from Stella's college fund. You told her it was okay. She claimed you said, and I quote, "Your sister doesn't need the money the way you do right now." Did you say that Elaine went pale? Her eyes darted to Martin, then back to Mara. I don't recall those exact words, but you recall the sentiment Mara pressed. Did you encourage Ruby to take Stella's money because you decided Stella was strong enough to absorb the loss? We were in a crisis, Elaine stammered. It was a medical issue. It was a gambling debt, wasn't it? Mara asked quietly. Or a drug debt. Or just a lifestyle debt. We have no record of any medical treatment for Ruby at that time. Elaine's mouth opened and closed. She looked trapped. We had no choice. She whispered. Mara paused. She let the admission hang there. We had no choice. Then she walked back to her table and picked up a small flash drive. Your Honor, Mara said, during the discovery process, Ms. Stewart provided us with access to her cloud storage, which included backups of old voicemails. There is one voicemail from 4 years ago that we would like to play. It was saved inadvertently when Ms. Stewart transferred data to a new phone. Ellis stood up. Objection. Surprise evidence. We haven't had time to authenticate this. It was provided in the discovery packet sent to your office 3 weeks ago. Mara said, It is file number 402. If you didn't review it, that is not the state's problem. Judge Vance looked at Ellis. Did you receive the packet, Mr. Ellis? We did, Your Honor. But then the objection is overruled. Play the tape. Mara nodded to the technician. The courtroom was silent. I looked at the jury. They were leaning forward. They had seen Elaine as a sympathetic mother a moment ago. Now, they looked unsure. The tape began to play. Elaine's voice. Hi, Ruby. Honey, it is Mom. Listen, I just wanted to say thank you for taking care of that account problem. Dad and I are so relieved. And don't worry about Stella. I intercepted the letter from the bank today. Your sister doesn't need to know. She never makes a fuss anyway. We will just tell her it was a clerical error if she asks. Love you, baby. The recording ended with a click. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Elaine sat on the stand, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth. Mara looked at her. Mrs. Stewart? Mara said, That was your voice, wasn't it? Elaine didn't answer. She was staring at the microphone. Mrs. Stewart, yes. Elaine whispered, In that voicemail, you explicitly state that you intercepted a bank letter intended for Stella to hide Ruby's actions. You said, Your sister doesn't need to know. Elaine began to cry. But it wasn't the pretty, sympathetic crying she had done earlier. It was the ugly, jagged sobbing of someone who has been stripped naked in public. We were just trying to keep the peace, she wailed. Stella gets so angry. We just wanted everyone to be happy by lying to one daughter to protect the other, Mara asked, by sacrificing Stella's financial security to keep Ruby comfortable. It wasn't like that, Elaine screamed. You are twisting it. No further questions, Mara said. She sat down. Elaine was shaking so hard the witness chair rattled. The judge looked at her with an expression that was hard to read, part pity, part disgust. You may step down. Mrs. Stewart? Judge Vance said. Elaine stumbled off the stand. She almost fell. Martin had to reach over the railing to catch her arm. He pulled her into the seat next to him. They huddled together, 2 people clinging to the wreckage of a lie they had built over 30 years. The judge called for a 15-minute recess before closing arguments. I sat on a bench in the hallway, staring at my shoes. I felt hollow. The victory, if this was victory, felt like ashes in my mouth. I had proven they were liars. I had proven they conspired against me. But in doing so, I had confirmed the one thing I had been terrified to admit to myself: I had never really had parents. I had just had captors who fed me. When we returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. The air was charged. Electric. The jury looked serious. They weren't looking at Martin and Elaine with sympathy anymore. They were looking at them like they were monsters. Ruby sat at the defense table, her head in her hands. She knew. She could feel the shift. Judge Vance entered. She sat down and arranged her robes. She picked up her gavel, but she didn't bang it. Instead, she looked over her glasses at the gallery. She looked directly at Martin and Elaine. "Before we proceed to closing arguments," Judge Vance said, her voice calm but resonating with a terrifying authority, "I have a question, not for the jury, not for the lawyers, but for the parents of the defendant and the victim." Martin and Elaine looked up. They looked like deer in headlights. "Mr. and Mrs. Stewart," the judge said, "I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have seen families torn apart by drugs, by violence, by greed, but I have rarely seen a dynamic quite like this one." She leaned forward. "You testified that you wanted to protect your family. You testified that you love your daughters equally, but the evidence, your own words, recorded on tape, tells a different story." She paused. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "At what point," Judge Vance asked, "did you decide that your younger daughter's comfort mattered more than your older daughter's right to be safe from harm?" The question hung in the air. It was a physical thing, heavy and sharp. Martin opened his mouth. He looked like he wanted to say something about misunderstandings, about stress, about being old-fashioned, but the words died in his throat. Elaine just stared at the judge, her mascara running in black tracks down her face. There was no answer. There was no explanation that didn't sound monstrous even to their own ears, because the truth was simple. They had decided it years ago. They had decided that I was the fuel, and Ruby was the fire, and their job was to keep the fire burning, even if it meant consuming me to ash. The silence stretched on for 10 seconds. 20 seconds. It was the loudest silence I had ever heard. Judge Vance held their gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, as if dismissing them from her mind. "You may proceed with closing arguments," she said to the lawyers. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, I stood up. My legs felt like lead. Ruby stood up. She was trembling. Conrad Ellis stood next to her, looking bored, checking his watch. He knew it was over. He had cashed the check for my parents' mortgage. His job was done. The foreman, a middle-aged man who looked like a schoolteacher, stood up. "In the matter of the state of Weston versus Ruby Elaine Stewart, on the charge of identity theft in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "On the charge of forgery in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of credit card fraud, we find the defendant guilty." Ruby let out a sob. It was a high, keen sound. Martin put his head in his hands. Elaine stared straight ahead, catatonic. The judge thanked the jury. She set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later. She looked at Ruby. "Ms. Stewart, due to the flight risk established by your lack of local employment and the severity of the charges, I am revoking bail. You will be remanded to custody until sentencing." Ruby screamed. "No, Mom, Dad. Help me." 2 bailiffs moved in. They took Ruby's arms. She struggled, kicking and crying. "Mom, don't let them take me." "I am sorry, I will fix it, Stella. Tell them I watched as they handcuffed her. I watched as my sister, the girl I had protected from bullies, the girl I had tutored, the girl who had stolen my life, was led away through a side door. The heavy door clicked shut, cutting off her screams." The courtroom began to empty. People were whispering, gathering their coats. I stood there for a moment. Mara Collins walked over to me. "You did it," she said softly. "Thank you," I said. She put a hand on my shoulder. "I will file the motion for restitution. We will go after any assets she has. And, Stella." "Yes. You did the right thing. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." I nodded. I turned to leave. Martin and Elaine were still sitting in the front row. They looked like statues. They had lost everything. Their house was mortgaged to the hilt. Their retirement was gone. Their favorite daughter was in jail, and their other daughter was a stranger. As I walked down the aisle, I passed them. Elaine looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Stella," she whispered. I stopped. I didn't turn my body toward them. I just turned my head. "How could you?" she asked, her voice broken. "She is your sister." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had intercepted a bank letter to hide a theft. I looked at the mother who had valued my silence more than my safety. "She ceased to be my sister the moment you decided she was more important than me," I said. I turned and walked out the double doors. The evening air outside the courthouse was cool and crisp. The streetlights were just flickering on, casting long shadows across the concrete steps. I walked down the stairs, my heels clicking a steady rhythm. My phone buzzed in my purse. I stopped on the bottom step and pulled it out. The screen lit up. Mom calling. I stared at the name. For 32 years, that name had commanded my attention. It had commanded my obedience. It had been the center of my gravity. I remembered the Sunday dinners. I remembered the guilt trips. I remembered the voice saying, "Stella will understand." My thumb hovered over the red decline button. I didn't press it. Instead, I went into the settings. I scrolled down to the bottom. Block caller. I pressed it. The phone stopped buzzing. The screen went dark. I looked up at the sky. It was a deep, endless indigo. I was 32 years old. My credit was ruined. My promotion was gone. My family was destroyed. I was alone. But as I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air, I realized that for the first time in my life, the air didn't taste like ash. It tasted like possibility. I put the phone in my pocket. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder, and I walked toward the parking lot, toward my car, toward my empty, quiet, paid-for house. I was alone, and I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was an emotional journey, and I hope Stella's strength resonated with you as much as it did with me. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes the hardest thing to do is to stand up for yourself against the people you are supposed to love. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member? Please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories and hitting that notification bell so you never miss an episode. We have many more stories coming about justice, resilience, and the turning of tables. Share your thoughts in English in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Stay strong.